June 15th, 1944. Off the west coast of Saipan. The pre-dawn horizon glows a dull red as battleship guns thunder from the sea, their shells ripping white arcs across the sky. 21-year-old Private First Class Eddie Halperin, assistant driver of an M4 Sherman from the 2nd Marine Tank Battalion, braces inside the cramped hull as the LCM landing craft slams against the waves. Diesel fumes, salt spray, and the metallic rattle of unsecured gear fill the air. Somewhere behind him, a Marine yells over the engine roar, 2 minutes! Above them, Japanese 120mm guns on a Fetna point flash like lightning strikes. Inside the tank, the intercom crackles. Driver, stand by. Eddie swallows hard. He can feel the vibrations of the ramp lowering, feel the sudden exposure as machine gun tracers whip past the bow of the craft. The Sherman lurches forward, clattering down metal slats and into chest-high surf. Saipan is already a nightmare. Marines are pinned behind dunes, bodies in the surf, radio men shouting into handsets as shells erupt around them. Japanese officers on the ridgeline, men like Major Hideo Yamaki, watch the American armor come ashore with thin smiles. To them, the Sherman is an oversized tractor, slow, easy to flank, and hopeless in close terrain. The Imperial Japanese Army has spent years drilling its tank hunter teams with the assumption that American armor is blunt and predictable. They believe the Type 97 Chi-Ha, despite its thin steel and outdated gun, has the agility advantage. And Saipan, with its cane fields, gullies, and volcanic ridges, feels like their terrain. But the battlefield the Japanese expect and the one they are about to face are not the same. Eddie's Sherman bucks violently as it hits a submerged sand ridge. For a moment, he fears they'll bog down, and that's when the first artillery shell impacts the beach behind them, sending sand and body parts into the air. Forward! Forward! Lieutenant Raymond Parker, their tank commander, shouts from the turret. Eddie feels the whole hull surge as the driver guns the twin GM diesel engines. The tank climbs over the ridge and onto Saipan's coral sand. To their right, Marines from the 6th Regiment wave them forward, pointing at pillboxes spewing machine gun fire. The Americans have landed under the muzzles of interlocking fortifications carved deep into the landscape. The Japanese have zeroed the beach for years. But now, unlike in earlier island assaults, the Marines don't advance alone. The Shermans roll with them. At 7:09 a.m., Lieutenant Parker calls out their first target, a reinforced concrete bunker with twin firing lanes. Gunner, traverse right, he ready. Halperin hears the breech slam shut. The gunner steadies the 75mm. A heartbeat. Then the cannon recoils with a crushing slam. Smoke fills the turret. The shell slams into the bunker, erupting in flame and pulverized stone. Marines leap from cover, advancing behind the tank as if the Sherman were a moving shield. Japanese officers atop the ridge stiffen in surprise. Their intelligence briefings did not prepare them for this tempo, this coordination. The last time they fought American armor on this scale was at Guadalcanal, where swamp, rain, and terrain neutralized U.S. tanks. But here the Shermans are not bogging down. They are moving fast, too fast. Eddie barely has time to register the terrain as they push inland. They crush shell craters, twisted barbed wire, trenches half filled with defenders trying to reload knee mortars. The tank shudders as a satchel charge lands on the rear deck, but bounces off without detonation. Marines gun down the would-be bomber before he can try again. Then comes the first real shock of the day. At 8:15 a.m., A column of Japanese Type 97 Chiha tanks bursts from the cover of trees, attempting a bold counterattack across a shallow rise. Their commanders expect surprise, and they expect the Shermans to hesitate. Instead, Parker's voice explodes through the intercom. "Enemy armor front. Load AP." Halperin feels the shift as the turret slews. The Sherman's 75mm gun barks. The first round punches clean through the lead Chiha, igniting its ammo racks in a tower of flame. The second Chiha fires back, its low-velocity 57mm round striking Eddie's Sherman at an angle, ricocheting off with a shriek of tearing steel. Inside the Japanese tank, the crew watches in disbelief. Their best gun, their best armor, and it cannot penetrate the Sherman's frontal glacis. Two more American tanks crest the ridge, their silhouettes massive, engines roaring. The Japanese column breaks. A Chiha attempts to pivot and flee, but the Americans rake it with coaxial machine gun fire, then finish it with a second AP shell that detonates the fuel tanks. On the ridge, Major Yamaki's jaw tightens. This was supposed to be their moment of advantage. Instead, they have just witnessed the technological gap that Tokyo's war planners refuse to acknowledge. The gap between 1930s tank doctrine and America's industrial evolution. Below, the Shermans keep pushing. Burning Chihas smolder in the grass. Marines cheer as the tanks grind forward, crushing obstacles and fear alike. Saipan's defenders are about to learn a brutal lesson, one that will echo across the Pacific. June 16, 1944. Northern sector of Saipan, halfway between Blue Beach 2 and the outskirts of Garapan. A humid morning mist clings to the volcanic ridges as the sun rises behind Mount Tapochau, casting long shadows over the torn sugarcane fields. Private First Class Eddie Halperin blinks sweat from his eyes. He hasn't slept in 30 hours. The fighting hasn't stopped long enough to even consider it. Sherman engines growl all around him, their exhaust mixing with the acrid smell of burning Chiha tanks still smoldering from yesterday's counterattack. Marines move in staggered formations beside the armor, rifles raised, scanning every ravine for hidden defenders. This, what the Japanese officers feared most, is the new American pattern. Tanks and infantry moving as one organism. But up on the ridgeline ahead, the Imperial Japanese Army still believes they have the advantage. Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito's staff insist the American tanks are vulnerable in steep, broken terrain. They argue that the Sherman cannot maneuver in tight ravines, cannot elevate its gun enough to fire on dug-in positions, cannot maintain tempo on volcanic slopes. They argue that the soft-bodied American infantry will fall behind and leave the tanks exposed. But as Saito's officers watch the battle develop, these assumptions begin to collapse. At Arrow 9:20 hours, Lieutenant Raymond Parker's Sherman advances toward a jagged outcrop known to the Marines as Hill 500. On its summit, Japanese defenders man 47mm anti-tank guns, heavy machine guns, trenches, and spider holes. The American infantry are pinned by overlapping fire, unable to close the distance. The Japanese officers observing the field expect the Shermans to stop or pull back. After all, tanks have always stalled here. The slopes favor defenders armed with anti-tank grenades and knee mortars. But not today. Inside the tank, Eddie braces as Parker shouts into the intercom. "Driver, angle left, use the dead ground. Gunner, look for the muzzle flash." The Sherman dips into a shallow ravine, disappearing from Japanese sight. The defenders pause, confused. The tank shouldn't be able to maneuver down there, too narrow, too steep, too uneven. Yet engine noise grows louder. The M4 reappears on the Japanese flank. A perfectly placed shot from its 75mm cannon obliterates the first 47mm gun and sends its crew tumbling backward. Marines charge forward behind the smoke, shouting as they throw grenades into the cratered hillside. Japanese officers stare in disbelief. The Americans are not attacking the ridgeline head-on. They're using the terrain, something Japanese tank officers long assumed U.S. armor couldn't do. Then the second shock comes. Parker orders the Sherman to climb. The tank lurches upward on the slope, tracks gripping loose volcanic soil that should have made ascent impossible. Japanese soldiers scramble to throw satchel charges as the Sherman claws its way higher. One charge explodes short, showering the tank with dirt. Another man rises from a foxhole and sprints forward, clutching a lunge mine on a bamboo pole. Eddie sees him through the periscope, sees the determination, the desperation. "Coax! Coax! Coax!" Parker yells. A burst of .30 caliber fire rips across the slope, cutting the attacker down before he reaches the hull. The Sherman reaches a plateau near the crest and fires point-blank into a machine gun nest. The defenders scatter as flames rise behind them. For the first time on Saipan, a Japanese strongpoint falls not from overwhelming artillery, but from a coordinated Sherman infantry breach executed with precision and speed. Down in a command cave near Tanapag, Captain Masaru Ikeda listens to frantic field reports. His staff had spent months preparing Saipan's defense with a 1930s-era belief that tanks were auxiliary weapons, useful for infantry support, but irrelevant in decisive moments. Japanese industry simply could not produce tanks fast enough or powerful enough to match American development. Their solution was not better tanks, but better infantry anti-tank tactics. But the Americans are no longer operating their tanks like Europeans in 1940 or like Marines on Guadalcanal. Sherman cruise now. Flank ridgelines using dead ground. Coordinate with assault squads using colored smoke. Use combined radios for instantaneous movement. And exploit the Sherman's stabilized gun to fire accurately on the move. Something no Japanese tank could do. Ikeda listens as another report comes in. Enemy tanks breached Hill 500, infantry following. We cannot hold. He clenches his jaw. They were told the Americans were clumsy. They were told the Sherman was slow. They were told U.S. armor doctrine was inferior. They were told wrong. By noon, Eddie's tank and the rest of the 2nd Marine Tank Battalion push into thick sugarcane. The stalks stretch over the tank like a curtain, blocking vision and swallowing sound. It feels like moving through a green fog. Every Marine knows these fields are perfect for ambush. The intercom crackles. Stay tight. Infantry on the right. Then movement. Shadows shifting. A Japanese soldier lunges from the cane with a satchel charge. The gunner fires the bow machine gun. The charge falls harmlessly into the stalks. Seconds later, 3 more attackers break through the cane on the left. Marines from the 2-6 Regiment cut them down in a volley of M1 Garand fire. The cane fields become a deadly ballet, Japanese attackers weaving through the stalks, Shermans grinding slowly forward, Marines firing from the flanks in constant motion. The Japanese officers believed this terrain would render American armor useless. Instead, American infantry use the tanks as moving fortresses, and the Shermans rely on infantry eyes to spot threats the periscopes cannot see. This is not the clumsy, disjointed U.S. armor doctrine of 1942. This is a mature, combat-evolved machine. And somewhere ahead, deeper inland, the largest tank battle in the Pacific waits. Bigger than anything Saipan has seen yet. The Japanese think their moment is coming. They have no idea it will break them. June 16th, 1944, 2100 hours. The sun has long vanished behind Mount Tapochau, leaving the battlefield drenched in darkness and tracer fire. A humid wind sweeps through the lowlands north of the sugar dock, carrying the smell of diesel, burnt cordite, and something worse. The unmistakable stench of death baking under tropical heat. Private First Class Eddie Halperin sits cramped in his assistant driver's seat, rubbing his eyes for the 100th time, and the tank interior is suffocating. 40 degrees Celsius, stale air, spent shell casings rolling under his boots. Somewhere in the blackness, Japanese snipers still take pot shots at anything that moves. Every minute or two, the hull rings with the metallic ping of a rifle round. But nothing compares to what's coming. For weeks before the invasion, Saipan's Japanese commanders argued among themselves about how to defeat American armored landings. Their final answer, one born of desperation, doctrine, and cultural expectation, was the same one they had used in China: the massed night tank charge. It was a tactic that combined shock, aggression, and the belief that Japanese tanks, smaller and more nimble, could swarm and outmaneuver American armor in darkness. But here, on Saipan, they would face something they had never seen before. Dozens of Shermans dug in and waiting, with interlocked fields of fire and Marine infantry screening their flanks. In a command cave near the village of Garapan, Captain Masaru Ikeda unfolds a map under lamplight. Around him, the surviving tank officers of the 9th Tank Regiment gather, their expressions grim, uniforms streaked with dust. Their regiment began the war as one of the Imperial Army's most respected units. Now, after 2 days of bombardment and combat, they have fewer than 40 operational tanks, mostly Type 97 Chi-Ha and Type 97 Shinhoto Chi-Ha models. Their armor is thin, their guns are outdated, their radios are unreliable. But they still have one weapon: the will to attack. General Saito's order is simple: smash the Marines, throw the Americans into the sea. It is impossible, they know it. But officers in the Imperial Army do not disobey. And so, at 22:30 hours, engines begin rumbling across the dark inland plain, the low growl of dozens of Japanese tanks aligning for a single, desperate assault. They advance with headlights off, moving by instinct and memory. Tank commanders shout directions into the night. Infantry follow in clusters, bayonets glinting in the moonlight. Ikeda stands atop a Shinhoto Chi-Ha, gazing toward the distant glow of artillery flashes. "For the Emperor," he whispers. Then he signals the attack. On the American side of the line, the night is deceptively calm. Eddie listens to the faint rattle of palm fronds brushing the Sherman's armor. Lieutenant Parker kneels in the turret, binoculars raised, straining to detect movement. Marines crouch in foxholes beside the tank, nervously checking rifle bolts. Then, faintly at first, the ground begins to vibrate. Not from artillery, not from bombers, but from engines. Many engines. The sound builds. A low, growing rumble like thunder rolling across the plains. Parker's voice breaks the silence. "That's tanks." A Marine runner sprints past, shouting the alarm into the darkness. "Tanks! Tanks! Tanks advancing from the east!" The line erupts in motion. Shermans crank engines, Marines chamber rounds, machine gun teams swing their barrels toward the rising noise. Eddie feels his heart hammering inside his ribs. This is it. The Battle of Saipan is about to enter its most violent moment. At 23:03 hours, the first silhouettes appear. Fast-moving shadows racing across the open sugarcane field. Their forms flicker in the moonlight. Small, squat turrets, narrow hulls, the distinct shape of the Type 97 Chi-Ha. A second wave follows, and a third. "Well, I'll be damned," Parker mutters. They're charging. But the Japanese officers are smiling inside their tanks. This is the moment they trained for. The swarm, the rush, the shock attack that worked in China and the Philippines. They expect confusion. They expect panic. They expect American tanks to be blinded by darkness. What they do not expect is the night suddenly exploding in white light. Parker shouts, "Gunner, AP, 50 meters left." The 75 Inventions cannon fires, illuminating the night with a blast of fire and smoke. A Chiha erupts into a pillar of flame before it can fire a shot. Marines cheer and immediately sweep the battlefield with machine gun fire. More Shermans come online, their silhouettes glowing from muzzle flashes. Their stabilized guns find targets faster than the Japanese crews can traverse their turrets. Within seconds, the field becomes a deadly chessboard. Chiha silhouettes darting between cane rows, Shermans firing in coordinated volleys, Marines launching bazookas at close range, tracers streaking red and green across the black sky. A Japanese Shinhoto Chiha manages to fire first, its 47mm gun striking the side of an American Sherman. The round dents the armor plate but fails to penetrate. Inside, Parker's crew hears the impact as a hollow metallic ring, nothing more. The offending Shinhoto bursts into flames seconds later, hit by 3 AP rounds from the American line. Another Chiha attempts to flank along a ditch, accompanied by infantry crouching low behind it. Eddie spots the movement through the periscope. His voice cracks. "Commander, movement right, tank and infantry." "Cokes, open up," Parker orders. The .30 caliber machine gun roars to life, mowing down infantry while the main gun obliterates the Chiha in a single blast. The explosion throws debris high into the air, silhouetted in orange light. By midnight, what began as a disciplined assault dissolves into chaos. Japanese tanks burn across the plain, their steel hulls glowing orange. Infantry scatter among the wrecks, some trying in desperation to lob grenades onto American tank decks. Marines cut them down before they can get close. Captain Ikeda's tank is struck by an American AP round that penetrates just below the turret ring. Flames engulf the interior. Ikeda climbs out of the hatch, his uniform smoking, and collapses onto the hull. For a brief moment lit by the fire, he watches the American tanks advancing through the wreckage of his regiment. He realizes, with crushing finality, that the Imperial Army's tank doctrine is dead. It died the moment Type 97 tanks met Sherman armor. Eddie's Sherman rolls forward through the battlefield, past burning wrecks and bodies illuminated in the firelight. Over the intercom, Parker says quietly, "They threw everything they had tonight." Silence. Then he adds, "And it still wasn't enough." The largest tank battle of the Pacific is over. The Japanese armored force on Saipan has been annihilated in a single night. But the fighting is far from finished. Saipan's ridges still wait. The last defense still waits. And the Shermans are about to drive straight into it. June 8th, 1944. Dawn. The sky over northern Saipan glows a pale pink, the light struggling to seep through drifting smoke from the previous night's carnage. The battlefield below is silent, except for the crackling of burning wrecks. Dozens of Japanese tanks lie scattered like twisted metal skeletons, hatches blown open, turrets ripped apart, blackened steel still radiating heat. Private First Class Eddie Halperin wakes stiff and disoriented inside the Sherman. He must have fallen asleep upright, helmet still on, chin pressed against his flak jacket. Lieutenant Parker's voice comes faintly over the intercom. "Wake up, Halperin. We're moving." There's no ceremony, no pause. The Marines don't have time to bury the dead or marvel at the victory. Ahead lies the last Japanese defensive belt, the one U.S. intelligence underestimated from the start. The network of cliffs, ravines, and cave fortresses surrounding Marpi Point. Here, The Japanese commanders aren't just defending ground. They're defending the Empire's last hope of slowing America's push toward the home islands. And they intend to make the Americans bleed for every yard. The northern tip of Saipan might as well have been carved for defense. Sheer limestone cliffs rise above the sea. Cave entrances dot the hillsides like dark eyes. Hidden vents provide firing slits for machine guns. Camouflaged artillery waits behind steel shutters. Tunnel systems allow entire companies to move unseen. This is no beachhead assault. This is siege warfare. American infantry advancing through the northern cane fields take fire from positions they cannot see. Rifle shots echo from cliffs hundreds of meters away. Mortars whistle down from concealed pits. Even flamethrower teams struggle. Each cave cleared reveals a second one deeper inside the rock. And through it all, the Shermans grind forward. But the Japanese officers still cling to one belief. The cliffs will stop the tanks. The rocks will hem them in. The narrow ravines will break their formations. They believe Shermans cannot climb, cannot traverse, cannot fire upward into cave mouths. They believe the tanks will become iron coffins. They are counting on it. At 800 hours, Parker receives the order that shocks every Marine in earshot. All tank elements advance into the cliff sector. Eddie looks through his periscope at the jagged landscape ahead and mutters, "You've got to be kidding." But this time, the Shermans have a plan. Unlike earlier operations in 1942 and 43, American tank commanders on Saipan now coordinate directly with demolition teams, flamethrower squads, rocket launchers, and artillery spotters. This isn't a straight-line advance. It's methodical breaching, one ravine, one cave mouth, one fortified shelf at a time. At the first ridge, Marines mark cave mouths with colored smoke. Shermans follow behind, advancing until they're close enough to angle their guns upward. The gunner locks the turret, elevates as far as the mechanism allows, and fires HE rounds directly into the entrance. A second later, orange flame blows outward as the shell detonates inside the cave, rattling the cliffs and sending dust cascading down the slope. A Japanese officer inside the tunnel system shouts into a field phone, his voice cracking. "They are firing into the caves. The tanks can angle high. The tanks can reach us." This realization spreads like wildfire through the defenders. Everything they believed about American tanks collapses again. By noon, Parker's tank approaches a ravine so steep the infantry around them assume they'll detour. Instead, Parker leans out of the turret and studies the slope. "Driver," he says calmly, "take the left bank, slow and steady." Eddie feels his stomach drop as the tank tilts upward at a terrifying angle. The tracks claw into loose rock. Pebbles slide beneath them. For a split second, the right track loses traction, and the 33-ton machine groans as if it might topple sideways. Then the treads bite again, and the Sherman climbs higher. Marines below stop fighting just to stare. A tank isn't supposed to do this. But Shermans, especially the diesel-powered M4A2s, have torque to spare. Near the top, a Japanese bunker opens fire at point-blank range. A burst of machine gun rounds ricochets off the glacis with a harsh metallic scream. Eddie ducks instinctively, even though the armor is holding. Parker doesn't wait. "Gunner, give me HE. Direct." The 75mm fires. The bunker disappears in a cloud of debris. Japanese defenders inside nearby caves watch in disbelief as the tank's silhouette rises above their position. Something no American vehicle has ever done in this kind of terrain. One soldier whispers to his commander, "They can climb the cliffs. The tank, it does not stop." Deeper inside the tunnel network, Captain Masaru Ikeda, burned, bandaged, but still alive after escaping the previous night's tank battle, leans over a field map covered in charcoal dust. He listens as frantic survivors describe the impossible. American tanks firing upward into the cave mouths. They are coming over the ridges. They crush the barricades like paper. We can't stop them. Ikeda stares blankly at the flickering lamplight. Tokyo had assured them that American tanks were inferior, that their doctrine was rigid, that their armor was thin, that American infantry were cowardly without overwhelming numbers. But now the cave walls tremble with each Sherman blast. Dust falls from the ceiling. The roar of tank engines echoes through fissures in the rock like approaching thunder. Ikeda closes his eyes. This is no longer a battle, he whispers. This is a reckoning. By dusk, the Marines have turned the impossible landscape into a methodical advance. Tanks covering infantry, infantry clearing blind spots for tanks, artillery isolating cave clusters, flamethrowers sealing tunnels. And everywhere they go, the Shermans lead. Eddie feels the tank vibrate beneath him as they push along a narrow ledge overlooking a sheer drop. Beneath them lies a tangled landscape of caves, trenches, and shattered bunkers, the remnants of 2 days of brutal assaults. Ahead waits the final Japanese defensive ring, the last line, anchored on the cliffs overlooking Suicide Point and Marpi Airfield. Japanese officers believe this line cannot be breached. They believe no tank can climb the final slope. They believe the terrain will finally halt the American advance. They believe wrong. Tomorrow morning, the Shermans will attempt the unthinkable, drive straight into the heart of the Empire's last fortress on Saipan. And when they do, everything the Japanese command believes about American armor will be shattered forever. June 19th, 1944, 5:40 hours. A faint gray light spreads over the northern cliffs of Saipan. The air is still, heavy, and thick with the smell of spent explosives. Below the ridgeline, waves crash against jagged limestone. Above it, in a last-ditch cluster of tunnels and fortified caves, the remnants of the Japanese defense prepare for the final stand. Private First Class Eddie Halperin sits inside the Sherman, helmet resting against the cool steel wall. Nobody speaks. No one needs to. Every man in the tank knows that this morning will be the end, either of the Japanese resistance or of them. Outside, Lieutenant Parker lowers himself into the turret and adjusts his throat mic. "All right, boys," he says softly. "Today we finish it. Marpi Point is the Empire's final fortress on Saipan, a treacherous labyrinth of caves overlooking the sea, deeply entrenched mortars hidden behind steel shutters, and firing ports impossible to spot until they open like the jaws of a beast. Japanese commanders believe these cliffs are impregnable. They believe the Shermans cannot climb the slope leading into the final cave complex. They believe the narrow ledges and limestone breaks will halt American armor in its tracks. That belief is about to die. At first light, the Shermans begin to move. They advance slowly, painfully slowly, treads scraping against jagged stone as they climb a slanted approach road blasted through the cliff face by years of defensive preparation. Marines from the 8th Regiment flank them on foot, weaving through shattered trenches and over bodies left from yesterday's fighting. A sudden flash erupts ahead. A concealed Japanese 75mm gun fires from a cave slit no larger than a backpack. The shot slams into the cliff wall just feet from the lead Sherman, showering the tank in fragments of rock. Marines dive for cover. Parker reacts instantly. "Traverse right, cave mouth at 11 o'clock. The gunner swings the 75mm cannon. The tank shakes violently as they fire. The HE round slams into the cave entrance and detonates with a thunderous boom. Smoke and rock blast outward like an erupting volcano. Another firing slit opens above them, followed by a rain of rifle shots and grenades. One grenade bounces off the Sherman's turret before exploding harmlessly on the rock. "Coke's up! Suppress it!" Parker yells. The .30 caliber machine gun responds with a ripping burst that cuts across the cave mouth like a scalpel. Marines farther left toss grenades into the secondary slit, sealing it with cascading debris. But the Japanese defenders aren't breaking. They've been ordered, by General Saito himself, to fight to the last man. The terrain steepens as Parker's tank approaches a narrow, angled ledge. The incline is so severe that Eddie's stomach lurches as the Sherman tilts upward. The engine roars, gears grinding under the strain. One wrong shift, one loose tread, and the 33-ton beast will slide backward into the ravine behind them. Japanese observers in the higher caves watch with disbelief. This cannot be real. American tanks cannot climb this grade. No tank can. And yet, slowly but steadily, the Sherman continues upward, treads gripping limestone, engines straining but steady. Inside the cave network, Captain Masaru Ikeda, his arm bandaged, his uniform ash-colored from smoke, listens as a runner bursts in. "Sir, the American tanks are climbing the final slope." Impossible, he thinks. No American tank has ever done such a thing. No tank on Earth should do such a thing. But the rumbling vibrations in the stone beneath him leave no doubt. The Shermans are coming. As the Sherman reaches a flat landing just below the final cave system, a sudden explosion erupts directly in front of them. A massive 200-kilo mine buried under a thin layer of soil. The shockwave rocks the tank violently. Eddie slams into his console. The tank stops dead with a metallic groan. Smoke fills the compartment. For a split second, Eddie thinks they're done. But the engine doesn't fail. The treads don't break. The armor holds. Parker coughs through the intercom. "Driver, tell me we still have movement." The driver, trembling, presses forward. The tank lurches, then continues. And with that unstoppable motion, the Marines erupt in cheers. The Japanese commanders watching from the cave mouth suddenly understand the truth. The Sherman is not just a tank. It is a symbol of an industrial power Japan cannot match. This is the moment they realize the war is already lost. Desperate, the Japanese unleash their final gambit. Soldiers sprint from the caves with lunge mines and satchel charges. Dozens of them. They scream battle cries as they sprint across the ledges. It is a sight both terrifying and tragic. Marines cut them down in waves. Flamethrower teams ignite cave mouths and pillars of fire. Rockets and grenades turn defensive shelves into collapsing rubble. And the Sherman, the tank the Japanese mocked as clumsy, weak, and slow, drives forward through smoke and flame like a hammer smashing the Empire's last shield. At 0930 hours, Parker's Sherman reaches the lip of the final rise. The tank rolls over broken stone and out into open ground, the edge of Marpi Airfield. To the east, the sea shimmers in morning light. To the west, the cliffs of Suicide Point loom over the battlefield. Behind the Sherman, Marines surge forward, securing the last trenches and capturing dazed defenders emerging from caves now choked with smoke. Up on a cliff, Captain Ikeda stumbles out of his command cave. He watches the American tank roll past the shattered gate of his final defense, a sight he never believed he would see. The tank pauses for a moment, turret scanning. Sunlight glints off its battered armor. Ikeda drops his sword. The sound is a soft, delicate ring lost in the roar of distant fighting. He realizes, with crushing clarity, that the Imperial Army's faith in outdated tanks and obsolete doctrine has delivered them into ruin. The Sherman rolls past him. Marines follow. The line collapses. Saipan is lost. By the evening of June 20th, the last organized Japanese resistance on Saipan has been shattered. What remains are isolated groups hiding in caves, cut off from command. The American flag rises over Marpi Airfield. Private First Class Eddie Halperin climbs out of the Sherman for the first time since dawn. His hands tremble from exhaustion. His uniform is stiff with sweat and dirt. But he smiles as he sees Marines clearing the final cave entrance, the one that Japanese commanders swore would never fall. Lieutenant Parker stands beside him, hands on hips, surveying the battlefield. "You know what this means, right?" he says softly. Eddie nods. "Yeah, it means they can't stop us anymore." Across the Pacific, the Battle of Saipan sends a shockwave through Tokyo. Never again will Japanese tank commanders underestimate the Sherman. Never again will they believe imperial doctrine is enough to counter America's industrial evolution. And never again will they mock the tank that just drove straight through their last defense. The lesson of Saipan is burned into history. Technology wins wars. Industry wins wars. And on Saipan, the Sherman proved both.